Harvest 52, 8:55. Boo. Boo started waking extra early to hustle to the cafeteria, scooping up the first serving of breakfast and fleeing back to his dorm room to eat. From there, he took circuitous routes to and from his classes and spent his free time studying on the floor of Aru's office and practicing in Ida's secret forest. Choosing the longest, most illogical route to thaumaturgy class took an extra 5 minutes from Boo's day, every day, but avoiding T and Kija for that little bit longer was worth it. Boo preferred the clinging attention of the older boys to their previous hostility, but more than that, he wanted to be alone, or to spend time with Ida and Aru. Something about T's newfound familiarity felt rigid and breakable. Boo couldn't shake the suspicion that T had developed a fear of the ghosts, increasingly present in day-to-day life. Did he think Boo was a talisman against them? As for Kija, Boo doubted he shared his comrade's positive view of either Boo or the Grimm. He had become increasingly nervous around Tuag, getting jittery and pale if forced to stand too close. Boo tried to imagine the view Kija must have had, pulling T out from under Tuag's frightful lunge. It wouldn't matter that the Grimm had no interest in either of the older boys. Having those fangs and unearthly eyes inches from your own would be enough to strike a profound fear of death into anyone. I said, excuse me? Ida's voice rang clear and cold from the corner ahead. Boo sped up, hoping to catch her before class. But he stopped in his tracks when he heard Kija's voice cut through the air like a whip. And I said no. You're not going anywhere until you get what I'm saying. T's voice this time, low and sharp, like ice cracking underfoot. Stay away from Boo. Boo's ears burned as he crept closer to the corner, drawn like a magnet to the sound of his name. Pressure built in his chest with every step until he could barely breathe, tension running through him like a bowstring. He swallowed, mouth dry. I don't control who Boo spends time with, and even if I did, why would I? Ida asked, dauntless. The shuffle of movement and T's lowered voice made Boo peek around the corner, seeing the older boy closing in on Ida. He stood a full head taller than her, broader in the shoulders and with long arms that could easily decide a fight. T hissed in her face, his expression curled up in an angry sneer. Because if you don't, I'll make sure you regret it. Boo's hands shook as he watched. Every muscle in his body tensed without direction. Should he run? Find a teacher or pretend he'd never seen this? Or should he make his presence known? If it came down to a fight, Boo wouldn't stand a chance without his powers. But could he control them well enough to risk using them under pressure and on living human beings? Boo felt hot shame flower in his belly as he watched T shove Ida. He should be running out there, defending his friend or at least evening the odds a little. A sideways glance made Tuag's supreme disinterest in the scene clear. The Grimm wouldn't step in unless Boo got into serious trouble. Ida landed heavily in a sitting position, grunting against the impact. She winced, rubbing at her rump as she slowly climbed back to her feet. Boo tried to read her face, but the awkward angle kept her back to him. Pressure built in Boo's skull until he felt it would burst, his limited options playing out before him. Showing himself might be enough to end the confrontation, but what if T decided to go back to his old ways? Practicing his magic had made him stronger than he'd ever been before, but his body still looked shrunken in comparison to T and Kija. How much damage would one punch do? Boo sucked in a shaky breath as he remembered the deep purple and green bruises stippling his body after the general had beaten him. The persistent, profound ache dogging his steps as they hiked from Red Birch to Scarred Lake. His imagination did not hesitate to show him the general's arm, rising and falling towards him, and Boo squeaked as he tried to dismiss the painful memory. He could run for a teacher, but he might not find one quickly enough. Should he yell out and pretend a larger group of people were about to turn the corner? His own cowardice brought nausea to Boo's throat. He knew the right thing to do, yet his feet stayed rooted to the floor. Ida wiped her hands on her robes, shaking her head as she straightened. Boo watched T and Kija's gloating expressions fall into uncertainty as they saw her face. "Why are you smiling?" T grunted. "Because." Ida's voice rang with amusement as she spread her hands to her sides, fingers splayed like branches as motes of crimson fire burst to life between her fingers. "You just made this into self-defense." The boys' faces stretched in horror as the fire in Ida's hands grew and warped, forming screaming shapes and flickering nightmares. A keening howl erupted from the flames, wailing so loud that Boo covered his ears. Ida cackled as T and Kija stumbled back, throwing up their arms for protection as they fled. As soon as the older boys disappeared from the far corner, Ida dropped her hands, panting and giggling as she straightened her robe. "That'll teach 'em." Boo's legs unlocked, turning from paralyzed iron to jelly as he half walked, half lurched to stand beside Ida. A light sheen of sweat glittered against her face, the hall uncomfortably warm around her, and she grinned as she saw him. "That was incredible," Boo stammered. "Thanks. Illusions are easier, but I thought they deserved something with a bit more oomph to it. I'm just glad the ceiling didn't catch. I haven't gotten the hang of water yet." They looked up together at the scorch marks blackening the wooden roof directly over Ida. Professor Rowe would likely appear at any moment, summoned by the fire's howl or reports from T and Kija. Still, they made no effort to leave. "I'm sorry." Boo didn't meet Ida's gaze, his own eyes fixed on the soot marks. "I should have come out to save you, but I couldn't make myself move." A hot flush warmed Boo's cheeks at the admission, but he knew Ida deserved the truth. "They were being mean because of me, and I should have tried to stop them." Ida scoffed, shoving his shoulder gently so he looked at her. Despite the sympathy in her expression, Boo could sense the underlying annoyance in the quirk of her mouth. "Did it look like I needed help? I'm older than you, better at magic, and bigger. Let me do the saving for both of us." Her smile was genuine as she offered him her hand. "And if I ever get in over my head, you can sick the Grimm on them or scare them off with undead voles or something." Boo allowed himself a chuckle as he took Ida's hand, ignoring her sweaty palm. It hurt, a little, to have his inadequacies stated so plainly, but he couldn't deny them. "But the gap is shrinking," he thought to himself as he considered how far he'd already come in the weeks he'd been at the university. They stood together against the onslaught of scolding and reprimands as Professor Rowe rounded the corner, face dark with anger. Their grips on one another didn't falter as they were marched to the headmaster's office and parked under his tired, resigned gaze. Only once the door closed behind them did they release each other's hands. Boo felt cold for the lack.